Hello to anyone watching this. I think now that the booster course pass is done, one of the things I've been going back on the most is sort of how I was feeling when it was first announced. Like knowing there was such a long road ahead and just knowing absolutely nothing about what was to come, compared to with Wave 6 where we knew basically everything apart from the absolute betrayal of the final tour track. And it's especially interesting to think about all the different layers of speculation that there was relating to track placements, what would appear, when it would appear, and even who would appear eventually. So today I just wanted to go over everything that I can remember about it, sort of just for my own clarity, to know that I'm not going mad that people genuinely thought Toad's Factory had a chance of appearing. So I'm going to talk about the main stuff here really. I'm not really going to refer to every Tom, Dick and Harry who thought that the Spiny Cup was going to be all rainbow roads. I'm going to talk a lot more about the concrete things that happened, all of the leaks and data mines, rather than just the pure ideas that people had, although I'm still going to reference the more interesting ones and the sort of disappointments that came and went as the waves progressed. But I think a good place to start is before the start, because obviously before the Booster Course Pass was announced, everybody was expecting Mario Kart 9. You know, it was going to skip the foreplay and just come straight out. But I was always on the train of thinking that Mario Kart 8 Deluxe deserved DLC, mainly because it was selling so well. It just didn't make sense to have Mario Kart 9 on the Switch. It should be saved for the next console instead. And I also think the sequel speculation sort of added to the excitement of the Booster Course Pass, even in the sense of it was so out of left field and there was so much content that we knew we were going to get that it just sort of made everyone carry over their Mario Kart 9 ideas, kicking and screaming back into Mario Kart 8. And that was the sort of theme with pre-Wave 1 release speculation, just so many shots in the dark of just saying whatever you want and just hoping that it'll come true. Because I saw a lot of people either think that they weren't going to include every Tour City track, or thought that there weren't any more Tour City tracks coming out, which even by that point, there was a lot of open data mining in Tour showing that Bangkok and Amsterdam were coming, even though they weren't announced at that point. Like, I always appreciate ideas that get the mind flowing and just thinking about the possibilities, but it felt like there were a lot of people already in denial about the fact that all of the content was coming straight from Tour. Which is really interesting when you think about the later waves, where it's, if you don't think about Tour, don't even bother. But the main piece of speculation before Wave 1's release was that what we saw hopefully wasn't what we saw, because so many people were hoping that the graphics were going to improve before release. Like, obviously the Booster Course Pass should have looked better from day one, but there was so much bending over backwards just trying to find a way to explain why the trailer footage looked so off. Just trying to act like it was massively pre-release, when the fact that the trailer came out a month before the DLC sort of in itself proved that it wasn't going to get much better. But away from the graphics, the part of the trailer that caught my eye the most was Mario seemingly driving backwards on Tokyo Blur, because at this point they hadn't explained how the city tracks would work, so I just assumed we were going to do 3 laps of Tokyo Blur 4. So to see Mario driving on Tokyo Blur 4R, it gave me so much hope that every track in the game was going to get a reverse variant of itself. It wasn't until like a day before Wave 1 released, with the random press release, that we actually found out the city tracks would be using different routage, but it was still just a magical month where I thought that the game would not only double in terms of course selection, but course replay value, or whatever you want to call it. But finally moving on to Wave 1's actual release, and this is where the floodgates of speculation truly flew wide open with the prefix leak. Because knowing that every track upcoming had a game tied to it, even if we didn't know what it was, it just made everything feel so much more concrete and guessable. There were of course a few tracks that could pretty much guarantee their spot. Obviously all the Tour prefixes meant we were getting all the cities, and the very final track being a Wii track implied it was going to be Wii Rainbow Road, even though I preferred Bowser Castle and was in denial myself that we'd get that for way too long. But still, the fact that we could even pinned down tracks made it feel so much more exciting. Although obviously the biggest red herring of the entire Booster Course Pass for a while was the blank slots, because when Ninja Hideaway didn't have the tour prefix despite being advertised as a tour course, everybody just naturally assumed that was a mistake. So to see all these other blank spots, it was like, pick your poison, pick whatever tracks you want to go in there, it's free reign. And it helped that quite a few more slots were apparently filled using the banner leak, which in a lot of ways was even bigger than the prefix leak, because this concretely said these tracks are coming based on what we saw in the image. It was especially interesting as we got some of our first looks at some of the other tour tracks, like Sky High Sunday and even Amsterdam Drift, and even some of the retros that were upcoming for tour, like Cooper Cape. It was just fascinating to sort of know that Nintendo just accidentally left this in here for us to find. And some of this information even lined up with the prefix leaks, because back then there were 2 tour prefixes at the end of cups in the same way Ninja Hideaway was. And considering the fact that Merry Mountain was already in tour and we saw Sky High Sunday for the first time, it's like, oh great, so those 2 tour tracks at the end are filled and we don't need to worry about any other new tour tracks coming. But there are obviously even more future tracks shown out in the open, away from all the data mines, in Coconut Mall, with the now infamous Dino Dino Camping and Vanilla Lake tracks, which pretty much everyone at that point took as gospel that those 2 tracks were coming. And I find it kind of weird that out of all of the routes of speculation that got proven wrong over time, that this is the one that got lambasted the most, that as people still held on to it as the waves came out. And I was one of those people who held on to the posters meaning something until nearly the bitter end. So to see it consistently lambasted as an idea was sort of odd, because it was so harmless compared to a lot of the other speculation that people had. But I mean, now we're at the other end, we can just enjoy those posters as cute references to other tracks that aren't in the game more than anything else, so that they still have value. But moving on, we have the most painful pre-release period out of any wave, with Wave 2. And it was so painful because we didn't really have an idea of when it would be coming. We didn't have any patterns to suggest anything. We just sort of had to sit tight and wait for it to appear, which I barely managed to do, personally. Like obviously in Mario Kart Tour, the Samurai Tour featuring Ninja Hideaway as a big advertising piece for the Booster Course Pass came out like a week after Wave 1. But as it was an older course and Ninja Hideaway came out about a year before anyway, it just made sense for the time. It wasn't really a sort of connect the dots thing at that point. And especially because the other new Nitro Tour tracks were thought to be in Wave 3 and 4, there wasn't really any reason to think that this sort of thing would be consistent. But about a week before Wave 2's announcement, we got the first proper outsider leak for the Booster Course Pass. And it was sort of weird. It was just like a Twitter image showing what all the courses would be, including what was probably hinted to be GBA Rainbow Road, which I don't know where they got that information from. But it was still sort of interesting because obviously, because there was no reason to believe this leaker, it was sort of in the background until the trailer actually came out and we could see they were right and sort of keep an eye on them for the future. But when Wave 2 was finally announced, it was glorious, seeing 2 of the more varied, at least visual-wise, Tour City tracks, seeing one of the most popular DS and Wii tracks being added, thinking Sky High Sunday was going to be good. It was such an amazing moment to finally have. But it obviously instantly put a lot of things relating to the leak into perspective, most notably the fact that Sky High Sunday counted as a blank prefix slot, which means that all of these blank prefix slots could be Tour Nitro tracks, which was weird to think about back then because it seemed like there weren't going to be that many, but all of a sudden, no, there's going to be 10 of them. It was sort of weird to conceptualize at that point. Obviously, as time went on, it led to its own branch of speculation, which I'll get back to as it becomes more relevant. But one of the other more notable speculation-wise courses was Snowland, mainly because it was the GBA's version of Vanilla Lake, which sort of was the first big hit instantly to the credibility of the Coconut Mall posters. But it's also sort of reminded everyone that not every tour track is going to get into this game, because it now meant that there were more GBA remakes than GBA prefix slots. There was also a slight crack in the banner leak that formed, as it showed that we would get Mario Circuit 1, meanwhile the one that was announced was Mario Circuit 3. But obviously, as it's all SNES Mario circuits, it didn't really matter towards its credibility at that point. But moving on to Wave 2's actual release, away from things like the cars in Coconut Mall moving, showing that they're willing to work on tracks after they release, we got the other big shock data mine of the Booster Course Pass being the music leak. And it was just really satisfying to have something like this, not just because it confirmed what we all knew that the city tracks were coming, but it pretty much solidified what Wave 3 was going to be. Because obviously Wave 2 followed the prefix leak to the letter, so to see all 8 tracks from what we thought Wave 3 was going to be have music next to them just gave a sense of relief, knowing that we didn't have to worry about what was coming anymore. Like, the only 2 bits of speculation left for Wave 3 was the fact that the GCN Waluigi Stadium music was also used for Warrior Coliseum, and the GBA Boo Lake music was also used for Broken Pier. That's literally all we had left to worry about with Wave 3, with just these 2 seemingly coin flips. And even that speculation got chipped away at between the weights of Wave 2 and 3. As Boo Lake got added to Mario Kart Tour, it pretty much solidified that that was what we were getting in terms of GBA Spooky Course. And it did also set in during the wait that we'd have to wait over a year to play Maple Tree Way, as it was shown to be in Wave 6 of the music leak. But we can still just sit tight and wait for the waves to release. But moving on, and the same leaker who showed what would be in Wave 2 is back with Wave 3, saying that Maple Treeway is actually going to be swapped for the GCN Stadium course, which a lot of people instantly believe, which is understandable as they had the information from before, but it just didn't make sense to me, because it felt like the prefix leak and the music leak was sort of solidified, like they'd already started working to develop each of the tracks for these waves. They wouldn't need to shuffle them around because they'd all be ready. That's why we had these leaks in the first place. But unlike Nintendo, I like using a lot of sense. So when the Wave 3 trailer came out and we did get Maple Tree Way, I was sort of taken aback, but I was still just happy to go along with it. I mean, we're still getting all these courses anyway. I mean, it's not like they're going to eventually start scrapping courses, so there's nothing to worry about. We're still going to get Waluigi Stadium or Warrior Coliseum. But one thing that the trailer did absolutely solidify was sort of how to figure out when each wave would be released. Because obviously Sky High Sunday released in Tour a week after it released in 8 Deluxe, similarly to Ninja Hideaway's re-release a week after it came to 8 Deluxe. And knowing that Merry Mountain was in Wave 3 sort of solidified when exactly we would get it. And this immediately narrowed it down to 2 possible weeks we could see it. The first one, which was an earlier one, was the week before the tour, time-wise, that Merry Mountain had been featured in the 2 previous years. So that sort of felt like the inevitable one. There's also, of course, the second option, which would have put it 2 weeks later. It had never appeared in that slot, but you never know. So obviously it appeared in the second slot, and we do never know. But either way, we got Wave 3 in the end. And with Wave 3's release, there wasn't really any major data mining that came out with it. But there was an interesting thing that was addressed, because in Wave 2, Cat Peach, Snooki Mario, Pink Gold Peach and Metal Mario were just sort of erased from the Grand Prix rival table, sort of implying they were going to be treated as more costume than characters, which sort of led to the pipe dream that we might actually get new characters, which was obviously a foolish notion since we hadn't been told about them. But the fact that this was addressed in Wave 3, it sort of implied that they noticed and it was something that they thought about, but sort of just patched over. So moving on to the gap between Wave 3 and 4, and I don't know if I just wasn't paying attention before, but people were suddenly really invested on Tor's data mines more than even 8 Deluxes. Like, this was where a lot of data mined code names and assets were found relating to Tor's upcoming city and non-city Nitro tracks. And while some of the tracks had information that made it obvious what they were, such as Yoshi's Island having not only an obvious code name, but just generally Yoshi's Island assets attached to it, there were more mysterious combinations, such as bathroom related items. There were also fence assets, which seem more mundane until you remember that the city tracks used the exact same fence assets, meaning we could guess what the code names were for the upcoming city tracks. So it meant that there was plenty of room to still speculate about what the city courses could specifically be based on their code names, but also just what these new Nitro courses could be about in general, as Tor had the same creative ideas as the main Mario Kart series for its tracks. And while it did lead to some videos, having the same ideas, running order, visuals, and even scripts, it still meant there was a lot of new ideas coming out for Mario Kart courses, like new Mario Kart courses, which is always some of the most fun ideas relating to any Mario Kart game. So it was just a fun time to be speculating. And also the fact that the amount of Tor courses data mined correlated to the amount of slots Tor was being given in the booster course pass according to the prefix leak meant that all of these ideas people had were going to make it into the booster course pass no matter what. But then the Wave 4 teaser trailer came out, which it started sort of mundane because at this point everybody knew we were getting a Yoshi's Island track. That wasn't a surprise. But then Birdo just appeared. Just for no reason, seemingly, we were getting characters now, and it sort of meant that speculation was once again wide open, in the same way it was when Wave 1's trailer first came out. Because not only could we speculate who was coming, but we could speculate how many were coming. Because it wasn't like the original Booster Course Pass trailer where we were told specifically 48 characters, we were just told more characters would be coming. So it was anyone's guess as to the number. And although obviously we could tell all of the characters were going to come from Mario Kart Tour as well, that was still an amazing pool to pull from. And even then, knowing that more characters were still being added to Tour, it was still perfectly fine to speculate pretty much whoever you wanted to be in the Booster Course Pass. It was just exciting once again. But with Wave 4's release, we got the concrete information that we were getting 6 additional characters, which was plenty enough to get. It was just kind of weird that there were 6 waves of the Booster Course Pass, but they never thought to do 1 character per wave from the start. But while it did sort of close off the infinite character roster people could imagine, and it sort of meant you sort of had to railroad yourself into being like, we are absolutely going to get Diddy, Funky, Pauline and PT in 4 of those slots, it was still fun to guess about who the last slot could be. And while it doesn't really add to the speculation, it was fun to see all of the stat changes sort of completely shaking up the meta, and it sort of added an extra level to every update, as they could still tweak character stats as they went. We could still get absolutely massive shifts of everything in the final 2 updates. I haven't really talked about the rest of this wave's tracks yet, mainly because this is where speculation started to settle. Like, yes, some of Wave 5 city tracks had been moved forward and backwards and everything, but the rest of the tracks were sort of what we were expecting. Like, we finally got Waluigi Stadium and all, and yes, it was really weird that Mario Circuit replaced Airship Fortress, but it was still sort of what we were starting to expect, so it was sort of satisfying to see everything start to come together in that sense, while we had characters to start thinking about instead. Although this was where some of the more consistent patterns of speculation started to be broken. Like, the Twitter leaker just died, apparently, because they hadn't said anything. And also the release date speculation sort of came crashing down. Like, since Wave 4 was releasing in the spring, and Yoshi's Island is a Yoshi-themed track, you'd expect Wave 4 to release a week before the annual Yoshi Tour, which would star Yoshi's Island. But no, it sort of just came out 3 or 4 weeks before the Yoshi Tour. It just feels odd because it was such a consistent pattern before, and they just ditched it for seemingly no reason. So it's like, why even have that pattern occurring in the first place? I mean, I never ever believe when people say, oh, Nintendo stopped doing it because people were guessing it. Like, that makes 0 sense to ever say. But it's just so weird that this was the wave they decided to just stop following that trend, when late March would have made just as much sense to release it as early March, like close to the Yoshi Tour's release. But yeah, away from that, speculation was just getting really settled. We pretty much knew the last 16 tracks, but things ever so slightly started to get shaken up with Wave 5's teaser trailer, because while we got the bathroom track, which we knew about, and we got Kamek and Peter Piranha as characters, which we expected, we also got Wiggler, which was interesting because Pauline, Diddy and Funky were such locks for the final 3 slots, but now there were 2 final slots, so it's like, which pair of them is going to make it, or are they going to do something else to add in even more characters? It just made it more exciting in a slight way again, even though it could lead to one of those 3 characters being murdered. But then we got Wave 5's main trailer, and that is the moment that everything changed, because while pretty much every track was what we expected at that point to appear, there was one little outlier that sort of made everyone nervous. Like, it was nice to see Moonview Highway, it was just sort of odd in the sense of what slot was it going to fill, because there was one other Wii slot left that we knew of, which was the last track of the last wave, so that was only ever going to be Rainbow Road. Like, who thought that Moonview Highway would ever originally be the last track of the DLC? But GameCube Mushroom Bridge was one of the main speculated tracks, and not only would they have thematic overlap, but why would Mushroom Bridge be moved back to Wave 6? It just sort of made it a really tense week waiting for Wave 5 to actually release and be able to see in the data mines exactly what slot Moonview Highway was taking up in the end. And it ended up taking up a Torn Nitro slot, which at first was really shocking, but in the end people started to settle again, mainly because multiple of the Torn Nitro slots turned out to have a lot of test assets relating to them. So they were most likely just test courses and weren't actually going to be releasing in any capacity. So in the end, we still knew we were getting pretty much every tour track that was actually being made, you know, no worries. It was just sort of weird that Moonview Highway took up that slot more than anything. Although it did mean that poor old Mushroom Bridge was probably being shoved off a roof, because while yes, Moonview Highway took up a slot that probably didn't belong to a Tour Nitro in the end, it still meant that the prefix leak wasn't absolutely solid at that point. It meant that the game that slot represented could be changed in the end, and the fact that we had this intense traffic course, why would we want a more sedate one for the final slot? It basically opened up a new free slot for whatever you wanted alongside these other 7 tracks that we pretty much 100% knew were coming. And yeah, that really was sort of the vibe of speculation between Waves 5 and 6, just sort of guessing what the new free slot's going to be and what the final other GameCube slot is going to be, because everybody expected we get one of the GameCube jungles. It was just a matter of picking which one made more sense to you. So that was sort of the final track speculation we thought we'd need. And the Wave 6 teaser trailer both did and didn't help, because while we got Wii Daisy Circuit, which filled in the final mystery slot, we ended up getting the 4 characters, which obviously 4 is bigger than 2, which meant that the character selection screen was going to have to be shuffled again, which sort of led to a new branch of speculation about whether even more slots could be added. And while I could overly go into detail about every possibility of the roster expanding, the main schools of thought there were that either some of the clones that had previously been removed from the Grand Prix table were just going to be turned into costumes straight up, or they were going to add another column, and we were either going to get more characters as part of the Booster Course Pass, or just a separate character pack in general. And so that was really the final major bit of speculation we had, just guessing how these last characters would potentially slot into the roster, which basically just turned it into a waiting game for the final trailer to be released so we could understand what the characters were more than the tracks, because really we knew what tracks were coming. But then the final trailer came out and just gave a proper kick up the arse to anyone who enjoys paying attention, because while yes, we got pretty much every track we expected and we didn't get any more characters like most people were expecting, there was still just a few things that were just so weird. The most obvious, of course, being the inclusion of Rosalina's Ice World, which in the end I do enjoy it as a track, but it's just so weird that the whole point of the pass seemed to be to have every singular tour track in it, but they just neglect one of them, which makes it the most obvious retro pick for Mario Kart 9. It's just felt so weird that just at the last hurdle they fell and just didn't include it, but they included all the other ones that people saw as way lesser tracks like Sky High Sunday. And with the characters, while there were plenty of people who thought that the Inkling Boys and Villager Girl could be folded in as costumes, it was still weird that they were constantly making efforts to sort of start to erase the Mario and Peach clones as their own characters, but at the end of the day, they were the ones left standing instead of those guest characters who are now costumes. But at the end of the day, all of the content that we got was still worth adding, apart from Peachette. It was still an incredible final wave to go out on, and we got plenty of bonuses alongside it, such as the music player and additional Mii suits. Although, for me personally at least, it did lead to one final bit of speculation, because while it was cool to see so many Mii suits, the fact that the display for them was being changed into multiple rows, the number that they were adding total to an odd number of Mii suits mean that we'd have a gaping hole left in the Mii suit select, which I always hate gaping holes. So I was just hoping that there was some last hidden Mii suits that we weren't seeing that were just going to be chucked in there. Like, I know I was being completely delusional, but I just wanted the game to not have any blank slots, you know? So when Wave 6 came out and there weren't any extra final Mii suits, it did leave just a bit of a bitter taste in my mouth, but that was just my mouth. You know, I still love playing everything, and I'd rather get 17 Mii suits than no Mii suits. It was just sort of the note that I should have expected I'd be left on, at least when the Booster Course Pass started. And that brings us back round to today, and like I said, it's just fun to think about where we were and what we thought the Booster Course Pass could have been. It's just always fun to see speculation, and for it to be this prolonged in so many aspects, it's just fun to think about how far we've come, really. I do think overall, in terms of the gameplay and waiting experience, Wave 4 will always be my favourite, mainly because of Birdo and bringing all the different coloured girlies along. Like, she was just the perfect first character to have, and she's already my most played character in the game, and like, I've had it since 2017, so that probably means something. But yeah, that's everything. If you have any questions or concerns, or can think of any aspects that I inevitably forgot to mention, do let me know. I just sort of hope that when the inevitable Mario Kart 9 speculation starts, it can be just as fun as Booster Course Pass speculation. It's like thinking about Mario Kart for the past 2 years so consistently and in different ways has been so much fun, apart from like July 2022 during the wait for Wave 2. That was absolute hell. But bye bye, have a nice day.